The reason you came to this class, it was listed as a new teacher track, but as Kyle already mentioned, it's really for anyone who wants a refresher or maybe just a different way of looking at something you've been doing for a long time. And so I taught this workshop last year for the first time, and he asked me to do it again. He said, I think we still have need, depending on which groups and which schools are able to come. I think we have people who would like to hear this again, and I said, sure. So we're going to rely a little bit on the words of John Milton Gregory, and so your handout includes a few of his quotes from the 7 Laws, which most of you should know really well, but I reproduced them nevertheless because I am using his laws as it applies to classroom discussion. So John Milton Gregory describes classroom discussion as waking the questioning spirit. And it can be described a few different ways, but I really want to rely upon his words because I do think he captures a need within us as teachers and the need within our students to stir them to want to know more. And the question is, how do you do it when you're leading discussions? And how do you know how to blend different methods and how it actually can work in a classroom? So, basically, I would say that our intentionality is everything to discussion. We can't simply show up and hope we have a good discussion. In Law 5, right there at the top, he writes that questioning is not therefore merely one of the modes of teaching, it is the whole of teaching, which takes it to a different primary level. In other places, he's talked about discussion saying that it is the true human stimulant. And it's something that really follows and echoes much of both Socrates and Aristotle's words about the actual importance of asking a good question and knowing, I would say in our modern terms, knowing how to roll with it. Whatever comes out of the mouths of our students, knowing what to do with it and where to go from there. So before I actually review a little bit of what he says, I wanted to talk about the Trivium briefly and how it relates to discussion. So if we talk about the 3 stages, and we talk about grammar, the sponge stage, as we are absorbing knowledge, that will be one particular type of discussion that you can have because many times you are in a factual mode and you are reviewing information and facts, which would be different from the progression into the dialectic, where you're analyzing and you're questioning and you're finding fault and you're also finding the good as you're trying to understand throughout a discussion. And then obviously you're building on those 2. You're always asking questions related to being a sponge. You're always asking questions related to what do we think of this? Why is it good? Why is it bad? What do we question? And we add to that with the 3rd level, with the rhetoric level. So hopefully this is review, but when you think of the Greek background to the word rhetor, or rhetoric. Anybody remember what it means? Do you remember from the Greek? Have you heard that, or has it been a while? Are you rusty? No one's jumping in. And it's after lunch when I ask the tough question. But rhetoric really honestly translates to the art of the speaker because it comes from the word rhema, which is to bring life into something, to breathe life into something. So if you are talking about rhetoric as the art of speaking and also the art of eloquence and the art of writing, at the same time, the Greek definition layer just adds this depth to what we bring to or can bring to what we actually speak. But it's also, I would say in discussion, it's the art of knowing what to do and when, and what method to use, and how to transfer between things just on the spot, even to discern how we respond to something that comes out of someone's mouth, the good and the bad. How do you on the spot do this? And this is really what we do day in and day out because we speak for a living. So whether you call it discussion time or not, you're always discussing. Would you agree? So it is what we do, and it's not just that we're training our students in a graded discussion or a discussion time. It's the fact that we're always models. We're always talking, and they're always responding, hopefully. So language really is the vehicle of thought, and so let's jump in on number 1 here. Number one, as far as the 5 ways to practice discussion, I'm just going to use John Milton Gregory's term, and that is simply review. Repeat it. Review. He said, review with summary questions. He maintains that true review still brings new understanding. This is foundational to learning new truth through truth already known, and most of us know that that's often called fastening. You take something new and fasten it to the old and loop onto it. Is one way to literally picture it, and this is basically Law 4. But in the real life, when you are reviewing things in class, I would say that pacing is critical, and I even added that in the notes, because you can review for too long. You can actually take an entire class period reviewing what you did the day before or the 3 days before all together and go, today is review day. And honestly, it's too much. Usually 15 or 20 minutes of review is enough before you add something new. But if you go too long, you're going to lose your students. And you know it. You recognize it when you reviewed for something for too long. So here's some examples that I like to use in my class. And these are not classical terms at all. So the first one that you could write down is popcorn style. I don't think that shows up in Charlotte Mason or John Milton. Yes, the popcorn style discussion. But do you all know what that means, to popcorn it? What does it mean to you when you hear someone say it?
So you call something out and some person just says something and the next person says something else?
Right. You pop it off. Basically, it would depend on the class if that works or not. Because you know as well as I do, some classes, depending upon your personality arrangement, that would not work. But others, especially if you have a smaller class, that does work very effectively. And so one way I do it as a literature teacher is we popcorn review something they read the night before. So maybe I assigned, 8 pages of a Scarlet Letter. And so rather than say to one of my students, hey John, could you tell me what we read last night? Instead of putting one person on the spot, I put the whole class on the spot. And I'll say, hey John, give me one sentence. What happens at the beginning of the chapter you read? And no 2 students can say or repeat any information. If you repeat something someone else already said, then you have to sit down and we'll boo and hiss you and whatever else you'd like to do. Or we'll do thumbs down. We'll do something so that you know, no, you weren't listening. Someone else said that. And we use the class to work with you. So John will pop up and say one sentence, Hester Prynne went into the dark forest, and sit down. And the next person who thinks they know the next part, I'll have them pop up. Sometimes I ask them to raise hands and we do it really orderly. Sometimes if you've done it a lot, they actually enjoy popping up and trying to say the next thing that happened in order. Or the class will say, that didn't happen, sit down. And someone else will stand up and go, this happened next. And before you know it, within less than 10 minutes, they summarized what it was they had just finished reading. And then I can say, all right, so when Hester went into the forest this time, can you tell me how that relates to any other story you might have read or seen before? And then almost always someone will say something about a fairy tale in a dark forest and a witch's cottage or something in the dark black forest. Usually Beauty and the Beast pops up every now and then, and we talk about those parallels, and then I begin to lead a discussion from their summary. But that's just one way to review, and that's very specific to the subject that I teach, of course. So another one that I know works really well is science, because we've used it with our own kids at home, is you can have your students repeat a timeline chronologically. Maybe you were studying the life of a famous person, and maybe you covered, 10 pieces of information, 5 pieces the day before at the end of class, and you want to see what they actually retained. Well, you can once again just ask for hands or try popcorn style and say, who can tell me about this scientist or this explorer, whoever you may be speaking about at the time. That works well. It also works well with facts of any nature, of any subject that you have. So if you're covering some kind of natural law or a list of things in biology or anything that's about the order of a process, you can simply see who remembers if it happens in a particular order and if they remember the actual information or not. And then where they forget or miss a step or missing a piece of information, then you fill it in, and that's part of review. That's what John Milton Gregory would advise us to do, is to continue to review, repeat the information again, and then add on more new information at the end of that. So that's basically what review is, and it's not complicated. And once you've tracked and changed to the new material, it actually helps to know where you're working, what you're working toward after that. So once you add the new information, the question is, how are you going to add new information? Is it that you're going to read aloud a portion of the Scarlet Letter to fall after what they just read? Is it that now you've laid these principles in your biology class, and so now we need to put it into practice, and we're going to look at the meiosis process in this plant stem cell right here, and this is how we're going to apply the pieces of information we just absorbed and see if we can apply it to what is the new information, of course. So number 2, as far as the second way to practice discussion, is something that I've just sort of added on to over the years, and it is more based upon Law 5, which I briefly mentioned right there, and that is the longest spell, using the pupil's mind to grasp the desired thought or to master the desired art. And I basically translate it this way. What is an explanation that can be given that will raise a new question while it's answering the old ones? So when a student answers a question that I give to the class and everyone thinks it's answered, then I will say, so who can add to that? What can you add to that? Who can tell me more? And I just wait, because usually someone else had a thought, or they would have said it a different way that brings understanding to more students, because we all process differently. And we may all have read the same 8 pages last night, but that does not mean we all saw it or understood it in the same way. So I often throw in the, what can you add to that? Okay, tell me more. Oh, you think you said everything about it. Do you really think you understood all of it? And usually someone else will pipe up and a few more students will respond and answer and really bring more to the table. And that's where we use each other, not just my mind, but each of my students' minds as we respond to what we read or whatever it is that we're learning or writing about. So this works really well if we've been summarizing or asking deeper questions of something. It does not work so well when I say, what can you add to that? Obviously, I wouldn't use it if I was asking for facts because I don't want to add and make up a fact that's not there. It's more for critical analysis and that idea. So John Milton Gregory also says, questioning is not, therefore, merely one of the devices of teaching. It is really the whole of teaching. It is the excitation of the self-activities to their work of discovering truth. An explanation may be so given as to raise new questions while it answers old ones. So it's the same principle. He may have written it more than a century ago, but it's the same thing that we're doing. So I had one particular discussion that occurred maybe 2 years ago when my juniors were at the very end of reading Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Is there anyone in here who hasn't read it? I'll totally spoil it. I'll have to say, just cover your ears. I can't spoil it for you. One of the beauties, the magic of the novel is the end. So if I give it away, you'll hate me later, and I don't want you to think that. Think ill of me. So I just wrote down what they said, because at the time it really made me think twice about it. And my students often call me Mrs. N for Mrs. Norvell, so I just wrote down what my students said. And she said, wait, Mrs. N, you mean Sidney Carton could not have been a savior in the story unless he had been redeemed from his evil ways? Could you be a savior if you hadn't been evil first? So if you recall, although Dickens isn't super direct about it, he was described at the beginning of the book, fellow lawyer, mastermind lawyer, honestly, but he was described as dissolute and staying out all night. And we know he drank, and it was implied he went around in the wrong areas of London, and yet beauty called to him, and he had become a changed man over time. And it did take time. But again, my student's question was, wait a minute, are you saying he could not have been a savior unless he had been redeemed from his evil ways? Oh, I so wanted to answer that question, let me tell you. I could have preached a dream right there. But I simply said, I don't know. What do you think? And that's a self-control on our part as teachers, right? Because I'm like, I want to answer your question. Or I might also say, hey, let's ask the class. Repeat the question, would you? You guys think about it. This one's for you. Turn to the class and ask the class. Don't ask me. Because the student had directed the question to me, the teacher. But then I also have the power in me to turn it back on them and not be the absolute authority. Because if you really believe, truly believe that we're learning together, you can't be the authority and the answer to every question, or you shouldn't be. Food for thought. So this is also, according to John Milton Gregory, this is knowing through comparing and judging, is what he calls it. Knowing through comparing and judging. And he does point out that you can add too much. You can actually say too much and go on too long when you are discussing a particular question. And really, it's the experienced teacher that knows when you've gone too long. So say you have 5 sections and you're teaching the same thing 5 times in a row. Would you say your first class of the day and that discussion is the same as the last class of the day and their discussion? Why is that? Have you thought about it? Why is it that the end of the day is just a little better typically?
Experience.
It's the experience.
You've realized that's what's important.
You've realized what's important. What else?
4 chances to get it right.
You had 4 chances to get it right, yeah. Exactly. So if you learn that much in 5 class periods, you also have to consider the fact what your students are learning in the same way. So if they read Tale of Two Cities 1 class year with you in 1 semester, when they read it again 5 years from now and you read it again and again and again every year, you continue to learn. But at the same time, you can let something go too long and you can add too much. And I bet you anything, compared to the first hour of the day and the 5th or 6th or 7th hour of the day, you probably got more concise instead of more long-winded. Did you notice that? I do. All of a sudden I cut down a lot of the, I don't know what the extra fluff is that I add in when I'm explaining, and I just want them to know, and they know I get excited and I have all this passion, I want them to see it. But at the same time, my job as teacher is to get to draw them out. It's not to shove it in their mouth and down the throat. It's that I want them to think. So it's the class, what do you think? Turn around and ask them. I know what I think. I've read this 10 times. But what do you think? So it's having the wisdom and the experience to know that. All right, number 3. Number 3, how many of you are familiar with leveled questions? Leveled questions. And I wonder if they're called different things in different subjects, but a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3 very much mimic the Trivium, but a level 1 is what happened in this story? Who's the character? What happened? It's just basic. It's the who, what. But level 2 is the how, why. And those are the good questions. The level 2 is why did C.S. Lewis have Aslan enter here only when Lucy could see him at this moment? Why did he wait? Why did he write the story that way? What does it add or change? Those questions are far different than just knowing the facts of the case. But we need to know the facts at the same time. And then a level 3 question is, what does this mean to me, or what should I do with this? And level 3 questions honestly work best when you finished reading something. Like you're all the way at the end, you have read the story, you've read the full chapter, you read the entire book, you finished the play, you read the chapter in the textbook, and before you have the test, then you can ask, what does this mean to me? What should I do with this information? And ask the bigger questions about theme and meaning and purpose behind all of it. So the level questions that work really well for me are the 2s, more than anything else. So many times, the way I use this in class so that I can actually get some grades from what they're creating and hold them accountable for the types of questions is, say I assigned a chapter or 2 to read the night before. You read the chapter and you have to bring in your top 3 level 2 questions. And I do teach them the levels just because it's a really easy way at the beginning of a school year, no matter what grade I teach. And I say, have a question. Bring at least 3 good questions that start with how or why. Why did Lucy talk to Aslan? Why did Lucy only see the dryads? Why did... And have them ask those questions, because it's not a yes and no. You actually have to answer with a phrase or a sentence. And then I have my students keep a running list of questions that they turn in at the end of a short story or X number of chapters if we have a big book. If it's a short book or a play even, I'll have them turn them in for a grade, and maybe they'll turn in 10 or 15 discussion questions that I grade them on. And as a literature teacher, I grade them, did they actually ask a how or a why, or what did Lewis mean when he added this here? I also make sure they're using partial quotations. We usually build over the year, and that they're using citations correctly from the page that they actually pulled a quote from or the information from. They have to give a page reference because we're building up to something. We're building up to group discussions led by them, and it really helps if you know what page a question or its answer is from, so you can discuss a piece of work in order if you're just going through it and the students are leading a discussion. All right, so the tools here in number 1, 2, and 3, I can use at any time, interchangeably, all on top of each other, whenever I want. And a skilled teacher, the more you do it, the more you can just pull it out of your pocket and you're not even thinking about it. But you can adapt them to what's going on in the classroom. And it doesn't matter if it's the same for one class to the next, to the next, to the next. But number 4 is the appeal to truth. And this is the one that's more of a level 3. It's really just all about the level 3 question, the broader questions. So it works well for a final discussion of a work, a play, a novel, the short story. These are the questions from Law 1, which I have for you here. It reads, the pupil, instead of seeing a fact alone, should see it linked to the great body of truth in all its fruitful relations. And so if you're teaching history or literature, these are the big questions, like what does this say about mankind? That's what a humane theme is. What does it say about human nature? What does it tell us about who we are, the creature who is man? What do we learn from this? You can go to the moral truth. You can say, what have we learned? What are the negatives? What are the positives? You can couch it in many different ways, but I can ask the broader questions. So let me ask you all this. How many of you do teach literature or history? Rhetoric or combined humanities? Anyone integrated humanities? A couple? Okay. Is there anyone who's only math or science and are here for fun? Okay. Although it can still work. I don't quite know how it works in a science room because I haven't actually had to try it, although I would love to. Latin? You tell me. That I will confess I do not have experience with that in a classroom with translations and all the other extras that you do. But maybe when you're reading about the life of someone significant that you're studying, or you're translating a piece all at once that has a historical position, you can definitely use the same type of review materials.
You can use this in math.
Yeah?
You can, especially like the review you were talking about.
Mhm.
What are the steps to solving this problem?
Yeah.
What do? You
Go
get
right
all
in
the
order.
X's on one side.
And if you get it wrong, you have to sit down. Yeah. No, yeah, that's true. It does work very well for a process. All right. You can also use appeal to truth, though. I added this at the bottom of the page as a midpoint, not just the final discussion, but the midpoint. And this is an interesting one. I'll go back to Tale of Two Cities just as a simple example. It's a huge novel. I mean, I feel we race through it and we take 4 weeks. 4 weeks is a long time on one book. But it keeps them going because they really don't know where it's going unless they read the Spark Notes. But midpoint, you're like 220 pages in. So much has happened. And I usually take a breather and have a class day where we just have a discussion back and forth. What is Dickens doing? What is he doing with each of these characters? What is Darnay up to? Now, what is it about his name? Do you remember? And it sort of becomes a point of review. Remember all the details that came to this place. But then we're also asking, what is the author doing? What is he creating? Okay, what is he trying to tell us? And then the fun questions are the predictive ones. Where do you think he's going? What's going to happen next? What do you predict? That kind of thing. And so I don't have to necessarily wait to the very end of a piece in order to make it work. So,
Can I ask you a question?
yes, please do.
Okay, how do you do, so I was thinking like early history of Rome or Herodotus or something that is a little more, and we have these 30 pages that are connected and then these 30 pages are not connected to anything else. Do you still would you walk through those steps in that? Or is it, hey, we're halfway through this book. Think about the last 500 years we've just read about.
I might stop earlier.
Yeah, or whatever.
Well, my question to you, because I haven't read Herodotus in 9 years. So, blasphemy, right? I didn't mean, what I said this morning is true, though. I really found it quite enjoyable. It was not dull in any way. Not dull. A lot of material,
Yes.
but not dull. I would actually stop at the natural breaking points when he switches subjects and geographies and discover them in like just logical chunks.
Yeah.
As he moves to this part of the planet and repeats all the bizarre stories and superstitions, and this is what elephants are not, yeah.
That's good.
I would just use the material itself to give me a hint of what to do and where to stop before I moved on to new material that, as you very easily said, it was not related. Because it just jumps around. That's very true. So, so let me give you another example, just a concrete example of an appeal to truth. And Fahrenheit 451. How many of you read it or have read it? You know the story. Okay, Ray Bradbury, science fiction. So I could ask my students in a final discussion, because it's a slim book, it really is short. I'd probably wait to the very end to talk about this. But I could ask more than once through the book, I could ask, what is Montag, our firefighter, learning? How is he changing? Because much of that story, because we've read it, is about how he changes from the beginning to the end. It's almost the hero journey. It's just not the typical hero journey we're used to because it's couched in this different genre. But he changes from beginning to end. He is not the same man. It's life and death to him by the very end. But I could take just the first few chapters and ask my class, how has Montag, as a man, making choices, how has he changed from chapter 1 to chapter 6? And then a few days later, we get a little further in the book. So how would you say Montag has changed now? What are you noticing? And most students, fellow humans, notice the changes because they can relate to the changes. And so they are paying attention to who he is as a model, and when he has to push against society and no longer wants to burn books because he wants to know what's in the books. Why are these people protecting them? Why have I never thought about this? All these things are happening to him and almost overwhelming him, but they cause this push or this shift in him that is so worth talking about. And the students are usually quite eager to talk about it. So I could take moments and just specific scenes even. After the firemen are called to burn a lady's house in her attic of books, Montag is the one who's assigned to go to the attic to torch them because his boss, the fire chief, is like, I'm not too sure I can trust you right now. You're getting a little suspicious. You go burn the whole attic. And a book opens at that moment just because of the force of the flamethrower kind of machine that they have. And Montag reads these lines. Time has fallen asleep in the afternoon sunshine. His hand reaches out and grabs the book to hide it in his jacket. He torches the books because he was supposed to, and he goes downstairs. He did his job, but he saw the words, and he knew he was supposed to burn everything. But then the old lady in the house chooses to die with the books rather than be executed or taken away. So when Montag returns home that night, we know it bothers him. He talks to his wife unsuccessfully, and we know it's symbolic. And my students could summarize the scene, of course, but then I ask, what is Montag learning about himself? What did you see him realize? How do you describe it when you come to realize something? What is real or true in that moment could be another way of asking the same question. And like I said, we can revisit the question multiple times in the book, and especially at the very end. So appeal to the truth. It can be spiritual. It can be anything that relates to humane learning and what it means to be humankind. It can relate to gender. It can relate to virtue or vice. Anything that we can learn about that we are capable of learning from can be appeal to the truth as far as how you frame questions. All right, my favorite is number 5. So I leave it for last with a little rubric. So graded discussions can move through all 3 levels of the Trivium very quickly. And they can be student-led or teacher-led, of course. And if one student leads, they receive a grade while their classmates participate. The leader prepares a brief reading, a summary of the reading, and their classmates prepare how and why questions. And I can coach them through or join them in on occasion, and I take notes and grade them using the rubric right there at the very bottom. That's how I grade them. It's just a homework grade in my class. Of course, your point system might be entirely different, and a 5-point grade is a homework grade, or maybe a 50-point grade is a homework grade, but there's mine just as an example of what I'm looking for in my students. So this works well if you're doing true Harkness. This works. And I don't care if you give it the Harkness label or you want to call it a Socratic circle or a Socratic seminar. This is just the nitty-gritty. So when I mentioned before that the students were given homework reading and they're required to write questions, and I asked them to put in parentheses, MLA citation, which pages their answer and their questions came from, then we organize those in class. And so I've done this a couple of different ways. I've seen it done when I first heard about this like a decade ago. A gentleman from Regents at Austin presented at ACCS, and he had each of his students just take a little slip of paper or a 3x5 card and write 2 questions on the card, cut them into single questions, and then when you come into the classroom, each of those students just give their pile to the student who's in charge of leading discussion. And you give that student like 10 minutes to organize everything and throw out questions that are repeated, because obviously if you have 20 students in class, some questions will be the same or close to the same. They'll throw out the ones that are repeats and then put them in the order that they want to lead the discussion. And the student summarizes the reading very quickly and concisely, and then jumps into the questions and asks them of their fellow students in the classroom. So I did try that for about 1 month, and it took too much time. It took too much time. It was not time efficient. I felt like we were wasting 15 minutes many times for the student leader to sit there and move around the little sheets of paper and oh that, oh Mrs. Norvell, can you help? Can you do this? And it took too long, and they were on the spot. And that made it tough, and it didn't work. So we sort of modified that. And then it became, hey, before the bell rings, come in and write your question on the board. So maybe we read 2 chapters from a particular book. And someone would put chapter 3 here, and they just put a title at the top. Chapter 4 here. This is pages 11 through 29. This is pages 30 through 37. And then you would know where to put your questions. And so each question had to have a citation, a page number in parentheses, so we knew where it went in order, even if they were mostly in order from one chapter to the next. And then if you were the first one to write your question on the board and someone else had the exact same question, well, they just didn't get to write their question. but you went ahead and put it up there. Now you may ask, well, how is that fair? Because what if a student doesn't write questions and just says, oh, hey, Mrs. Norvell, but all of mine were taken? Well, remember that homework sheet they have to turn in when we're done reading? They have to have all the questions. So they turn it in as a written grade, let alone a discussion grade. And the other thing is that you use mob rule just a little bit, in that it will soon be your turn to lead the class and get a grade. Don't you want to help each other so that when you're up there, you have enough to answer and to lead so that you receive a fair grade as well? And it's worked really well. I have not had any issues with that. Maybe 1 or 2 rebels, but we take care of that quickly and say, nope, you're joining in on this one. So, the table discussions and Harkness discussions are usually mutually led by students. And although I do enjoy that, that's a different variety on this one. This is where a student is the leader, and I'm sitting in the back corner at the back desk or just somewhere hiding away, not being really involved, and I just move off and let the student take over. And for the first couple of weeks that I do it, we don't do it every day. We only do it maybe twice a week. I found if you did it 3 or more times a week where a student led the discussion, they get too used to it and they don't really give it their best effort. It just becomes too familiar. So I found out if we only did discussions for a grade once or twice a week, that was a much more productive time because they weren't so used to it. Does that make sense? So then they all take turns, and yes, it may take a couple months for everybody in class to get a grade for leading, but I was always tracking it and always keeping a list, and they always got a grade back from this short little rubric. I just gave them this little sheet. Once I'd finished grading, they'd given the summary. Did they connect similar questions? The third part on that rubric said, did they guide and focus the class? And that takes training on the part of the teacher to do that, but many times the first few weeks, I would actually tell the student leader, okay, you're up at the room, and you're pointing to the questions and we're answering that. All right, so now go ahead and move to this one over here because that's connected. And I actually guide them through and interrupt a little bit those first few weeks till I get my students comfortable with the system. But once they're comfortable, it sticks. They know exactly what to do as long as I don't overuse it. And then finally, they do have to, the last part of the rubric was, do you allow and ask each of your classmates to respond? And although it's true, some students will say, I don't have anything to say, and they're being honest. Others will just say, I don't want to say anything. But you still have to ask each other and participate in order for it to be a true class discussion and learn from each other. So let's say 3 or 4 months of this go by, and then the familiarity sets in again. So usually at this semester, I give the boost reminder and say, listen, we're learning together. I can lead discussion or you can, but I really enjoy seeing you lead in a different role. And one of the beauties of this particular process when a student is at the front of the room leading the discussion is that some students who are typically quiet in class, or I really couldn't tell other than in their essays that they had a thought, when they were forced to lead the class and not to and ah and use like too much and all the other things they've learned in their public speaking reminders and other subjects, a whole different part of them actually shone out. I could see a different side of their personality, and many of my students who've graduated have said, I'm so glad you had us lead a 30-minute discussion in class because it forced me to think on the spot, to work with everybody who was in the room together, whether they were working with me or not. And because you graded it, Mrs. Norvell, it pushed me to do it well. And so I would say, I mean, you can count this as part of a public speaking grade if you wanted to. I think you can use it not just in literature and history reading and things like that, but it's just a good method you can employ from time to time once you train them in it and they get used to it.
How old were your kids when you did that?
I've taught 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th to do it. So I have not taught 7th and 8th. 7th and 8th, I think I could do it if I knew it would be less than 30 minutes. because 20 minutes would be a good time frame for a 7th and 8th grader to lead something. So I would probably cut the assignment in half and have fewer questions on the board, or maybe all the students in the class would turn in their questions a day ahead of time to Mrs. Norvell, and then I would choose what the questions were so the younger student had a chance to look at them before they would say write them on the board for everyone to see. And of course it's really fun when you lead a discussion this way, because as soon as you're done answering one question, the student leader is the one erasing the question very happily. Look, one more off the board, and then the board gradually just gets emptier as you go and it's done. So it's a good and fair process, I find. So that is different obviously than Harkness. And Harkness is mutually led, of course, and we have 1 or 2 workshops about the Socratic circles and Harkness. So does anyone need a quick review? Are you good on Harkness? Leading discussions and how that works. That also, of course, is based on the same premise. You've all read the same material or reviewed the same material. You do come prepared with questions. And you, of course, train your students for what you're looking for. So in my upper literature classes, many times, let's say we were doing a poetry study, and I've taught them a lot of technical terms, and they know that Mrs. Norvell wants to know, you must ask the question, what is the tone of the poem? What does the poet make you feel? What is the mood? Those simple ones, but then also, what is the rhyme scheme? What does the syllable structure say about Emily Dickinson's frame of mind? You know, there are a lot of fun ones like that too. But again, the teacher pulls away because you're training them to reach that point. And you realize if ever there's chaos, this class has not failed. You have. You go back to the drawing board and you retrain and you interact more with the student leader. And I've done this with one particular very lively class. Is that a politically correct way to say it? When you have maybe 10 very strong personalities, which that is probably my record in a class. I thought 5 and 6 was a lot. But when you have 10 personalities out of 18 that are immensely strong and dominant, how do you do that without chaos? Well, let me tell you, you're the student leader, and I know you're having fun and cracking jokes and leading the discussion, but Mrs. Norvell, I'm your co-chief. Here we go, we're gonna do this together. You take that question, I'll take the next one, and we're gonna ask the class, and I teach side by side with them and model it with them till I can finally tell I can let go of the steering wheel for a little bit longer. And if they get out of hand, it's like, oh, you guys, I'm going to have to jump in again. I'm going to sit next to you on the driver's and the passenger seat. Do you want to drive or do you want me to? You tell me. And so it became something that you model, and at the same time you let them know you earn that ability to lead. And if you don't quite have it, that's my job. That's what I'm here for. So it can definitely work no matter what kind of class you have and the types of personalities you have in any given class, of course. You can make it work, you just have to be flexible at all times, immensely flexible and adaptable. So if we go through what John Milton Gregory has told us, we know that we can review in a number of different ways. We want to entice the student to learn from themselves and to ask good questions. I can ask things to them and of them when they look at me for an actual answer. I can say, what can you add to that? Or I want to make you find out for yourself. You tell me what it is that you could say right now instead of me answering the question. I can ask leveled questions. I can require questions as part of their reading, an assignment and homework to turn in to me for a grade. We can talk about things broadly with level 3 questions. How this relates to us as mankind and the spiritual and the virtues and the vices and all of those things. And finally, I can do a student-led discussion because I've trained them to that point. But they definitely all build on each other, and yet they can be used interchangeably, constantly. Even in the same class time period, I can do more than one based on what we're learning in class. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I would love to hear questions, or if you have anything to offer about a discussion style or maybe a variation on a theme here that would be helpful for us to hear and to share. This is that grand moment after lunch where you're not yawning. You drank all your sugar.
I know, I'm ready.
It worked out.
I can add one.
Go.
I teach middle school omnibus and Bible. So we do a lot of discussion based, and Harkness is just too much freedom. It's too much for them. They can't handle it. So one thing that I came across was Fishbowl discussion method, and it seems similar to what you're kind of saying, where I actually don't jump in hardly ever. I try to jump in less than 3 times per time, but it's only a 20 to 30 minute discussion out of a 45-minute period.
Right.
But they work as a team. I don't know if does anyone have experience with it? Okay. So you work as a team, and we have teams of 3. So you have 1 discusser, 1 note taker, and 1 question asker. And so the discusser is the only person who's free to discuss the whole time. The note taker charts the whole discussion, and then the question asker throws fish food into the fishbowl. And there's usually 3 to 5 teams working together at any given time, and then there's some observers and things. But it forces them out of that, out of their normal roles. You know, so you put the kid who's really loud and boisterous in the note-taking question, and every time that he talks, his whole team gets -1.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Little character training in there.
But I have found that to be really helpful, and it helps. I think it helps with our Harkness later, because they know to take turns.
Yeah.
To not constantly talk over someone.
Right.
What notes do they take? I might have missed it, I'm sorry. What do they take? What
So they're
notes?
usually Cornell note style. So like try to find the main points from the discussion, and support it with, you know, it's not this person said this person said this. It's
they share
it's
it
much
later with
more.
someone, or-
Yeah. So then at the end, their ticket out the door for the day, kind of exit ticket type, is you have to, and I'll vary it. Sometimes it's give me a 2-paragraph summary of what we talked about. Sometimes it's you have 7 words. Give me the 7-word sentence to describe what happened today.
That's good. Can I steal that?
Yeah,
Yeah, I like that. 7-word summary. What did you learn today in this discussion?
exactly 7.
Nail it down. I like that. Because that's like creative and analysis at the same time. That's good.
And math?
Yeah? And math.
Yeah.
We can hit 7. We've got this. Yeah, that's good.
It's only 7 words.
Yeah.